I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israel stands in solidarity with the victims of Hurricane Harvey. The Israeli Prime Minister vows to never evacuate a Jewish settlement again, and we'll reveal how celebrities are taking a stand against anti-Semitism. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Well, to all of our horror, Hurricane Harvey is continuing to wreak havoc across the Gulf Coast of the United States. Israel has a delegate in Houston now assessing the situation, but Texas police have confirmed that at least 9 people have already died as the floodwaters continue to rise.
Everything is destroyed.
I walked out and I was just like screaming.
Jewish federations have been sending all kinds of aid to support families displaced by the catastrophic storm of the century. Nearly 30,000 people are expected to be forced from their homes in the aftermath of the Category 4 storm, which has caused historic flooding and damage. Local Jewish services helped evacuate nearly 150 blocks of Jewish homes. And now the Jewish Federation of North America has opened an emergency relief fund for victims all over Texas. Gilad Katz is Israel's special consul general, and he's in Houston right now as a crisis ambassador. According to Katz, even more rains are still to be expected, spreading more floods all over Texas and Louisiana. As for the victims of Hurricane Harvey, it's as if they're living like cavemen, he said, with thousands stranded from their homes without food, water, or electricity. There's little choice but to just wait out the floods and hope the waters recede soon. Houston is the 4th most populated city in the United States, and when the storm hit, many chose to stay in their homes rather than evacuate the city. But Katz, who spoke with many such people personally, is saying they now regret their decision not to leave. Volunteers and emergency forces are working night and day to aid victims of the storm, but for many, these horrific scenarios are already life or death. Well, on the heels of UN and American peace missions, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is taking a stand and declaring that the state of Israel will never evacuate another Jewish settlement. At a ceremony marking the 50th anniversary of Israel settling in the West Bank, Netanyahu proclaimed, "We're here to stay forever." The settlement issue has been at the center of peace talks since the beginning and continues to be a controversial point of debate. Netanyahu's pledge cements the state's claim to the disputed land, while Palestinians believe the nearly 500,000 Jews living there threaten any possibility of a future Palestinian state. In fact, the settlements are usually the central point of peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, a question which has divided the international community. Just today, a group of Palestinian landowners and Israeli rights groups actually filed with the state to halt the construction of a new settlement, which was originally planned to service the families evacuated from the Amona outpost earlier this year. The Israeli government had actually doubled its budget recently to speed up the new settlement, but the new objection aims to bring things to a complete stop. Well, it looks like the Prime Minister is plowing ahead on Israel's commitment to expand Jewish homes into the West Bank on the very same day he slammed the head of the United Nations, who was in town to negotiate peace talks.
The mandate of the UN was to advance peace and security and international cooperation. And this is something that we seek to do, but I think objectively we can say that the UN has failed when it comes to Israel to live up to this mandate. The UN is mandated to preserve world heritage, but UNESCO, a world body, time and again makes a mockery of that heritage, most absurdly, when it denies the connection 3,000 years old of the Jewish people to our eternal capital, Jerusalem. The UN is mandated to pursue peace, but it allows Palestinian hate speech to flourish in its institutions. The UN is mandated to stand up for human rights, but it allows in its various forums the worst human rights violators to take up the cudgel and to accuse Israel of violating human rights.
It looks like Israel's taking a very hard line, hopefully one that can still lead to peace. Joining me now in the studio to help us take a harder look at Israeli-UN relations is former Israeli ambassador to New Zealand, Ambassador Yosef Livni. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So, you know, we just heard Netanyahu's words, and we're hearing Guterres say Israel shouldn't be taking everything so seriously that's happening in the United Nations. What is your response to a comment like that?
Well, I think that people should remember that the UN does not have a will of its own. That the resolutions which are adopted reflect the political constitution, if you will, of the organization. And as long as there is an automatic majority against Israel, we'll have to live with anti-Israeli resolutions time and time again.
So in many senses, I mean, this is kind of the world speaking up and saying how it feels about Israel. So to hear a comment like that, it's obvious why Netanyahu would be infuriated, to say the least.
Most Israelis understand that the UN is an arena where we have a challenge. We have a challenge.
I think another point that we have to acknowledge here is what is the role of the Secretary General of the United Nations? We're seeing Guterres come here, and he says that, you know, he's here on a mission to try to change the failing system, bring peace about, but that he's also just a broker between the countries. Does he have any power in helping Israel and the Palestinians come together? Or, I mean, what would you say his position is? What is the true extent to his power?
I think that he cannot go against the will of the General Assembly of the United Nations. At the end of the day, he has to represent their organization. He can use his personal aura, if you will, prestige, right, to push forward certain issues. He can be, if he is very charismatic, then yes, his personality can play a certain role up to a point, up to a point. We shouldn't forget that he doesn't have a private will of his own.
Right. This is not the President of the United States. This is not the Prime Minister of Israel.
He was elected by the world body where the 5 permanent members agreed upon his candidacy, and he is bound by the resolutions of the organization.
So in that case, is there anything that is going to come about from his visit to the region?
Well, I don't know if he can push the envelope further. I'm sure that it's important to have his goodwill. I think it's important for him to come away from Israel confident that Israel is committed to the peace process and that is willing to do whatever it takes within reason to achieve peace.
Well, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what kind of impact this visit has on the future statements that he makes.
The GA starts in next month, the UN GA, and we'll be able to see how he handles himself.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming in, Ambassador.
Thank you.
We've been following all kinds of shifting alliances lately in the Palestinian world, but now it looks like a major deal has just gone down. Hamas has restored ties with Iran, and obviously this has huge implications on Israel. The new head of Hamas has just announced that Iran will now be the largest backer of money and military aid to Hamas's army. And he didn't leave any shades of gray about what this partnership means. That the two are now pooling their resources to destroy Israel, saying they are, quote, developing our military strength in order to liberate Palestine. Hamas has been forced into a corner recently, with the Palestinian Authority cutting back major financial aid in hopes of brokering a new unity deal and placing Gaza back under President Abbas's control. But clearly Hamas has other things in mind. Meanwhile, another relationship is also quickly warming up between Turkey and the Palestinian Authority. Turkish President Erdogan has just met with President Abbas seeking a favorable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian dilemma.
أجريت اليوم محادثات مثمرة مع فخامة الأخ الرئيس أردوغان حول مختلف القضايا التي تهم البلدين، ووضعته في صورة آخر التطورات في منطقتنا، وبخاصة نتائج الزيارة الأخيرة للوفد الأمريكي والجهود الأمريكية بقيادة الرئيس ترامب من أجل صنع السلام بيننا وبين الإسرائيليين. ونحن من جانبنا نؤكد على التزامنا واستعدادنا لعقد صفقة سلام تاريخية تحت رعاية الرئيس ترامب.
Relations between Turkey and the PA stepped up following last month's crisis on the Temple Mount, which saw some of the bloodiest clashes between Israel and the Palestinians in years. President Erdogan is claiming that finding peace would benefit Israel as well, although just a few weeks ago he was condemning Israel's, quote, acts of aggression by placing metal detectors to deter terror at the Temple Mount. Clearly, major changes in the Palestinian world are underway, and Israel will need to be ready to answer. For years now, the state of Israel has been back and forth with the high courts trying to reach a final decision about what to do with African migrants seeking refugee status in Israel. Well, now there has just been a new court decision which may change things completely. Joining us in the studio with the latest update is ILTV's Aaron Porras. Now, Aaron, what has Israel's policy been with asylum seekers in Israel up until this point?
So historically, the response, at least by the Netanyahu government, has been to force deportations of the vast majority of asylum seekers who are looking for refugee status. Now, in Israel, and this is a major issue because in Israel there are over 40,000 asylum seekers seeking refugee status.
It's not a small number.
It's not a small number, and most of them are from Sudan and Eritrea and other war-torn areas. And the state typically has taken the position of denying 99% of refugee status applications, denying the majority of civil rights to a lot of these people.
And then the
while
question
they're in the
is, what happens to these people in that interim, right?
So in the interim, yeah, a lot of times they're taken to detention centers until their forced deportation date can come about.
So we have a new decision from the Supreme Court, and how is that changing what is taking place right now?
So essentially they're saying that it is unconstitutional to put these people into detention centers indefinitely. They're putting a cap on how long these people can be detained. They're increasing certain civil rights that these people are going to be receiving, and they're attempting to make it, to catalyze, to add, a catalyst, and speed things up for the process for people who are seeking refugee status. But
that's a double-edged sword in many senses.
It's a major double-edged sword, yeah, because you have Netanyahu who has already said, this goes against my traditional policy, and he's already vowed to look at what actions he can take to kind of turn this around.
Well, let's check out more details.
For years, thousands of Africans have been making the dangerous and illegal journey to Israel, hoping to find asylum as refugees in the Holy State. With over 40,000 African migrants living in Israel now, this has posed a difficult question to the Israeli government, who seek to maintain Israel's Jewish majority over all else. Although Israel is a party to international agreements granting refugee status, the state has found ways to deny legal responsibility for asylum seekers. Most of migrants living in Israel were fleeing a life of slavery in the Eritrean army or the war-torn fields of Sudan. But of the thousands who've applied for refugee status, the state has only approved close to 1% of them. The rest have been forced to live in Israel without any civil rights, even as residents, and thousands of them have been jailed in the Cholot detention center, where they sit in an open prison for years if they refuse to return to their home countries. But now, Israel's High Court has called these measures unconstitutional and is demanding that the state cannot deport any asylum seekers against their will, and that they can only imprison them for a maximum of 2 months. This is a major win for rights groups and the African migrant community, who have faced extremely difficult conditions in Israel on top of their scars of war from their home countries. The courts did, however, uphold the state's policy of deporting Africans to an undisclosed third-party African nation, commonly suspected to be Rwanda or Uganda, a policy which most of the Western world has outlawed for decades. Netanyahu has immediately blasted the court's decision to unwind his government's policy and is pledging new laws to continue denying refugee rights to asylum seekers, but the court's decision was unanimous, meaning the fight is only getting started.
For nearly 2 years, Israeli Knesset members have been banned from visiting the Temple Mount. But today, the government decided to test out a one-day trial to allow them back, giving Israeli lawmakers a chance to enter the Temple Mount for the first time since 2015. With Jerusalem's Temple Mount at the focus of religious and political debate all over the world, it's been a source of conflict in the past for Israeli lawmakers to enter the holy site. Prime Minister Netanyahu placed a ban nearly 2 years ago on Knesset members from visiting the Temple Mount. At the time, he'd hoped the decision would calm escalating unrest in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. But now it looks like the government is dipping its toe into the waters and seeing if the conditions have cleared up for lawmakers to begin visiting once again. The Prime Minister has just made a one-day trial run, giving Knesset members their first glimpse of the Temple Mount in nearly 2 years. Though the trial was open to all members of the Knesset, only two, Yehuda Glick from the Likud party and Shuli Moalem from Habayit Yehudi, came to participate. The members of the Joint Arab List Party announced their refusal to the invitation, saying that they would enter the holy site whenever they wanted, not when Netanyahu decides. Israeli security will now analyze how the day's visit has affected security or stability in the region, with the potential of expanding the program and lifting the ban altogether. Now, speaking of entertainment, there's a lot of it here in the Holy Land, but one biannual festival stands apart. Coming this October is the 52nd Abu Ghosh Music Festival, and to tell us more about it is conductor and longtime festival participant Yuval Ben Ozer. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hello.
So tell us a little bit about the festival.
It's a very special festival that takes place in a village near Jerusalem with wonderful church, with the most beautiful view of Jerusalem and the best acoustic you can imagine.
And also Abu Ghosh is known for its hummus as well, right?
Yeah,
but that's just part of the fun.
But it's an important part because every festival needs to give a broad experience and not just a concert. And Abu Ghosh is the perfect place for that.
Absolutely. So what kind of acts are we expecting this year? When you say music, is there a specific type of music or is lots of different performances?
It's all about vocal music, all the masterpieces of the classical music, Bach, Mozart, the Passions. And because of this acoustic and because most of this music was written for that kind of venue and acoustic, that it's a vocal festival.
And are these performances indoors, outdoors, a mix?
The big concerts, the big great pieces are in the church, inside.
Beautiful.
But when you enter to the festival venue, you can hear a lot of music because there are a lot of outside events, musical events.
And again, you mentioned this and I said it, but Abu Ghosh is a beautiful town right outside of Jerusalem. So there's a lot more to enjoy beyond just the music there,
Absolutely.
But it's a good reason to go. So, tell us about your role specifically this year, what you're going to be doing.
I conduct a very special piece, Canto General, by Mikis Theodorakis, the famous Greek composer, for a text by Neruda, the Chilean Pablo Neruda, the Chilean Nobel.
Poet.
And it's a great, Canto General is a great cycle of songs.
Yes.
And when Mikis Theodorakis was in exile in Paris, he wrote for 12 songs of Neruda, wonderful music. And this combination of two great artists bring together just fantastic piece.
Well, that sounds like something that I would go just to hear that specifically because I didn't know that his poems had been turned into music. Amazing. So where and when can we see this amazing event? Because we're running out of time. Abu Ghosh Festival, when and what time?
It's in Sukkot, the second part of Chag Sukkot.
Okay.
And it's in Abu Ghosh near Jerusalem. There are many, many concerts. You can enter to the internet site and see all the really beautiful concert programs.
Beautiful. So for those of you who do not know when Sukkot is, that's October 10th to 14th, 2017. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, well, the MTV Video Awards have always been a place for making statements, but I doubt even Kanye could compete with this. The creator of MTV's hit series Catfish appeared on the red carpet wearing a yellow Star of David, the latest celebrity to silently protest the rising anti-Semitism that's spreading across America. Nev Schulman, who is also the star of the show Catfish, took center stage at the VMAs with his controversial accessory. In an attempt to call out President Trump's inability to properly condemn the neo-Nazis that rallied in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia earlier this month, Schulman wore the yellow star to visibly protest the growing storm of white supremacy in the United States. But he's not the only celebrity taking a stand. Paris Jackson used her time as a presenter to call out white supremacy.
If we were to all put our voices together, do you realize the difference we would make? If we were to all stand up, united as one, our impact, it would be huge. Believe me, huge. And that's not fake news. So let's leave here tonight remembering that we must show these Nazi white supremacist jerks in Charlottesville and all over the country that as a nation with liberty as our slogan, we have zero tolerance for their violence, their hatred, and their discrimination. We must resist.
The Yellow Star trend started last week when Jewish musical legend Billy Joel performed in Madison Square Garden, shocking audiences with the accessory pinned to his lapel. While performing Goodbye to You, he even took it to another level by projecting pictures of recently fired White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who is credited with the rise of the alt-right movement. Fashion statements are always drawing controversy, and this one is no different. Some tweeted that the Piano Man had lost his mind, while others are calling it epic and brave. Well, Israelis have been officially freaking out ever since the world's greatest ginger talk show host landed in the Holy Land. But now Conan OBrien has just gotten maybe his most prestigious greeting yet from none other than Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Prime Minister Conan's in Israel.
Who?
Conan OBrien, the late night host.
Get back to me when Colbert is here.
Well, the Prime Minister tweeted his humorous hello to Team Coco, welcoming him to Israel amidst OBrien's 5-day tour of the Holy Land. OBrien is exploring Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Bethlehem, taping his latest Conan Without Borders TV special after promising to help Jared Kushner broker peace in the Middle East. But now it looks like Conan's really taken this mission to heart, sitting down for a very serious one-on-one session with the Israeli Prime Minister himself.
Here's sit. You must sit. You must sit. There you go. Here's the difference between this dog and an American dog. No American dog is satisfied with a cucumber. They want 2 cucumbers. You,
Sure.
What is this? No.
Meet Kaya. She's paler than you.
Yeah, paler than me. This dog. If you tried to give an American dog a cucumber, it would punch you.
Kaya? Kaya?
Well, they're clearly getting up to serious thing. OBrien's taken his antics all over the country, talking with Israelis in Jerusalem and even stopping to visit the Western Wall. Live tweeting his adventures along the way, Conan's been haggling for deals in the markets of Old Jerusalem, hitting the Hookah in Bethlehem, and even crashing an Israeli high schoolers' hackathon event in the David Museum. This is day 4 of Conan's 5-day visit, which means, unfortunately, Israelis only have one more day to get their selfies.
Enroll in eTeacher's online Hebrew courses and quickly discover that it creates the deepest connection to Israel that you could ever imagine.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Lots of celebrities have been protesting rising anti-Semitism by donning a yellow Star of David in public events. Most notably is Nev Schulman, the host of the popular show Catfish, so we've decided that today's word will be sfam which means catfish. Now, sfam actually breaks up into 2 words, sfam meaning whiskers, and non, which is a very old Hebrew word for fish. Put them together and you have whisker fish, which actually I think is an upgrade from catfish. In Hebrew, sfam really just refers to the catfish itself, but in American slang, to catfish means to pretend to be somebody you're not on social media. That's considered a pretty lowly thing to do, just like a sfam which is a bottom dweller. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 74 or 23 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect sunny skies with little to no change in temperatures. The high will be around 86 or 30 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.58 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for watching.